We have had, against expectations, a slight decrease in the business climate number. It's come in at 95.2 compared with last month, which was 95.8. The current business confidence is also down slightly, but one surprise and probably good news is that we do see a slight increase in the expectations component of the index. I've got Gernot Nerb from the IFO Institute to talk about that right now. Mr. Nerb, what was the reason for this slight decrease in the headline number?
The exclusive reason this time was that we saw a weakening in the retail sector and also to some extent the whole trade sector. We think this is a temporary phenomenon to a large degree caused by the weather conditions. So this is why we think the upturn will continue after this short interruption.
Tell me, but there has been also an increase in the expectations, which was a bit of a surprise. What was driving that?
Well, the improvement in expectations came mainly from the manufacturing sector and the construction sector. In the construction sector, of course, we see there is quite some order volume in the pipelines, which will feed production in coming months.
That's something that's coming through because also we had the cold weather really shut down the construction industry here in Germany.
That's right. So the second quarter will probably be rather strong. This is, of course, a phenomenon we had already in the past. But positive is that in manufacturing, which is, of course, not so much influenced by weather conditions, we see a clear upward trend.
Now, how much of that has been driven, or the confidence has been driven by that 10% drop in the euro that we've seen since the end of November?
Well, it has some impact. The export expectations increased quite a bit already this month. And if you see the big share of export in manufacturing, of course, this explains to some extent why manufacturing is doing relatively well.
Let me ask you about that drop in the euro. Do you expect to see further drops in the euro as we see that fiscal crisis going on in other southern European countries?
Well, we don't rule out that the euro could weaken a bit more. Of course, from a purchasing power consideration, it's still too high. So when we are asked in other surveys, how do you assess the euro, it's still seen as overvalued to some extent. So I would not be surprised if the euro is weakening a little bit more, but more or less we think it will keep this level we see at the moment.
Let me ask you, there seems to be a disconnect between that optimism among manufacturers, which is driven by exports. We've seen that some German manufacturing companies are beginning to increase production again, but that doesn't seem to be translating into consumer spending. What's the reason for that?
Well, consumer spending was not so bad in the past months. We were surprised that consumption was keeping up. But now we see some weakening. We can't explain it from the income side because we had some tax reductions. So the saving ratio must have increased somewhat this month. But this is, according to our view, a temporary effect. So we would see probably in March and April again a recovery.
And is that also reflected in the expectations among the retailing businesses that you've spoken to?
Well, the retailers, I must tell you, they have only short expectations because it's much more difficult in the retail sector to forecast the development than is the case in manufacturing. So here the expectations actually didn't improve, but nevertheless, everything I think is in favor of a recovery also in the consumption sector.
Let me just ask you about interest rate policy in the European Central Bank. The Fed, of course, just increased the discount rate. What sort of sign do you think that the European Central Bank should be taking from that?
Well, I think the central bank should be very cautious in their exit strategy. I think there's no reason to hike rates this year. But of course, in the non-interest business, they can slowly begin tightening. But they should be extremely cautious because we have seen in the past in Japan that you can make lots of difficulties for the economy if you exit too early.
So now's not quite the right time to be raising interest rates. We need some caution ahead. Gernot Nerb, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us.